Passage in Matthew 25 verse 31 has created a lot of interest, a famous scene where Jesus is judging members of the various nations and assigning them either to a place in the kingdom or to a place of exclusion from the kingdom of God. In Matthew 19, first of all, verse 28, we have this classic statement about Jesus' return and what will happen at that point. When the Son of Man comes in his glory, that phrase that we find in 25:31 is repeated almost verbatim in 19:28. So I'm putting these two verses together, 19:28 and 25:31. In 19:28, Jesus said to them, "Truly I tell you, that you who followed me in the rebirth of the world, when the Son of Man is going to sit on his glorious throne, or throne of glory, as the Greek says, you also will sit upon 12 thrones, judging the 12 tribes of Israel." That's clear. The reward of the apostles and those faithful to the true Christianity, the reward of the apostles and those faithful to the true version of Christianity will assist Jesus in administering the new world that will be born when he comes back at his parousia, at his second coming. Then in 25:31, when the Son of Man comes in his glory, the same scene, and all the angels with him, then he will sit on his throne of glory. At that point, in verse 32, we read that all the nations will be gathered before the Messiah. Now, these nations are being assembled in front of the Messiah for a special judgment. This is not the judgment of Christians in general, because the apostles and those who have been faithful to Christ will be administering the world at that point. They will have been resurrected, immortalized in the twinkling of an eye, and they will have taken up their positions of administration. But here we find all the nations being gathered, and individuals from those nations are being selected. On what basis? Well, it's a question of how well they have treated, as Jesus says, one of the least of these my brothers and sisters. So we immediately ask, what does Jesus mean by one of my brothers standing here with me? And for that we go back, of course, to Matthew 12, around 46, 48, where he says, who are my brothers and sisters? Those who do the will of God, the faithful Christians. This has nothing to do with unconverted Jews at this point. Now, we grant fully there is a future for national, natural Israel in the future. That's Romans 9 through 11. But in the gospel, it's quite clear that those who do the will of God are the brothers and sisters of Jesus, and that's true of the New Testament as a whole. The issue in Matthew 25:31 is how have various individuals in the nations treated those spiritual brothers and sisters of Jesus? And they don't even know that they've treated him well or badly. The criterion here is a humanitarian one. They've fed him, they've helped him, clothed him, visited him in prison, and so on. This is not a judgment on Christians in general. How many people did Paul, for example, visit in prison? Probably very, very little. These people are being assessed on how well, presumably in the Great Tribulation, which immediately precedes the second coming, how well they treated the true Christian people. Were they on their side? Did they support them or not? At the second coming, in verse 32 of Matthew 25, all the nations will be gathered before the returned Messiah, and he will then separate them from one another. And the them there is not separating nation from nation, but separating individuals from the nations. And he will put the sheep on his right hand, the goats on the left. Now, this is not a judgment of Christians in this age, prior to the second coming. It's a special judgment given to those who have treated Christians well or badly, as we'll go on to read. He will say to the sheep, "Come, you are blessed, you who are blessed by my Father. Inherit the kingdom," get salvation, in other words, "prepared for you from the foundation of the world." And here he details then why it is that they are worthy of salvation. I was hungry and you gave me something to eat, thirsty and so on, naked and you clothed me, sick and you visited me, I was in prison, you came to me. And the righteous then will say, when did we do this? We're not even aware that we did this to you, Jesus. These are not believers in the New Testament sense. These are people, presumably during the Great Tribulation, which just precedes the second coming. who have treated the Christians well. And we're going to see that these are indeed Christian brothers and sisters of Jesus, who have been either well or badly treated. Then the righteous will say in verse 37, Lord, when did we see you hungry? We don't understand this. We're not aware of having fed you or helped you. And he answers them in verse 40, truly I tell you, to the extent that you did this, these good things, feeding the hungry and so on, to one of these brothers of mine, even the least of them, even the most insignificant Christian disciple, one of those whom you treated well, that's enough to make you worthy to enter the kingdom. Not, I think, as an immortalized person at this point, but to be allowed to enter the kingdom perhaps as a mortal. The point here would be that the brothers and sisters of Jesus are clearly defined earlier in Matthew 12, in fact. Who are my brothers and sisters? They are all of the faithful Christians who did the will of God. These people being drawn as individuals from the nations are not in that category. The reason I say that is because the resurrection has already taken place here. The saints of the present time will have been immortalized, and they're administering the world with Jesus. So this is a separate and subsequent judgment based on how well these individuals from the various nations treated the Christians, presumably in the time of trial when you could be against the Christians or for them. They don't even know they've treated Christ well. They were doing it unbeknownst, in fact, to Christian disciples, those who are the brothers and sisters of Christ. I must add, the brothers and sisters of Jesus here are not unconverted Jews. That's just wrong. Yes, there is a future for natural Israel. In Romans 9 to 11, we see that. A remnant, a collective conversion of the Jew, as we call him today, is expected in prophecy. But that's not the point here. The brothers and sisters of Jesus are firstly, of course, the true Christian believers.